Only 15 teams have reached the peak of being crowned European champions in the modern era of the Champions League. But if their best campaign was winning the title, what was their worst campaign? Starting with a team that won just one title, Man City, a club that started to rise a lot since the UAE took over, resulting in their 2012 Premier League title. But right after that trophy, their European dream was shattered. They went to the 2012-13 Champions League, but the first match was already against Real Madrid, so City fought hard, managing to take the lead. But it didn't last long.
Marcelo with his right foot! Benzema turning! Oh yeah!
The first defeat, but there were still 5 games left. So next, they faced Borussia Dortmund, but they only managed to draw. Now if the situation was already tough, the next opponent would be none other than Ajax. Yeah, it was the group of death, so City needed a win. But after taking the lead, Ajax turned it around. With another defeat, they had just 1 point. Now the pressure was to win the next 3 games. A single draw would get them eliminated. But when they faced Ajax again,
И опасная ситуация. И мяч даже в исполнении Аякса. Эриксон подает на ближнюю штангу, и посмотрите, что происходит.
the Blues even scored 2 more goals after that, but they couldn't pull off a comeback. Man City was eliminated. Now to avoid greater humiliation, they managed to draw against Real Madrid. But to finish this disastrous campaign, they faced Dortmund, who gave City yet another defeat. In 6 matches, they didn't win a single one, drew 3 and lost 3, finishing last in the group. And in this video, we'll go from the clubs with just 1 trophy all the way up to the biggest winners. Now, if City won their first Champions League in 2023, the next club is the most recent one to join them on this list, Paris Saint-Germain. Today they are a powerhouse, but in the past they were nothing like that. Years before being bought by Qatar, they qualified for the Champions League by finishing second in the French league. For them, it was a huge deal. It was their first appearance in a tournament in 10 years. But their squad was far weaker than it is today. So in their first match against Chelsea, they were hit hard. A 3-0 defeat at home. Next up was CSKA, a team PSG was expected to beat. But in Russia, they lost 2-0. It started as a disaster, until the third match, when they faced Porto and PSG finally got the win. Now they had to keep winning to reach the round of 16. But against Porto again, it was a draw, and against Chelsea, another draw. But they still had a chance. If they beat CSKA at home in the last match, they would advance. Everything was laid down for them. But that's not quite what happened.
Sur le sol. On va passer
Et là, cette fois-ci, ce ballon.
Oh là là. Et but de Semak.
With a 3-1 defeat at home, PSG was eliminated in front of their own fans. 1 win, 2 draws and 3 defeats, marking what remains to this day their worst Champions League campaign. Now, another club that only has 1 title is Borussia Dortmund. Many people don't even remember, but Dortmund is a Champions League winner, having won it in 1997. But exactly 20 years later, they had a campaign to forget. In the 2017-18 season, Dortmund came in with players like Aubameyang, Götze, Pulisic, Rafael Guerreiro and others. Expectations were high, especially since they had just reached the quarterfinals in the previous season. But in the first match against Tottenham in England, reality hit hard. 3-1 to the English side. It was a blow. Now the pressure for the next match skyrocketed, but it was against Real Madrid, who gave them no chance. 3-1 again. Well, those were 2 tough opponents, but at least the next match was against a team they were supposed to beat, Apoel. So Dortmund went all in. But then
with a great opportunity, and it's fumbled. Pote is there, and Pote scores!
Apoel scored. Meanwhile, Dortmund could only manage to draw. But even worse than drawing with Apoel is doing it at home. In the next match, they faced the same team again, and even with a packed stadium, they drew. That's already embarrassing. Now, to avoid elimination, they were forced to win the last 2 games. But against Tottenham in Germany, that's not exactly what happened.
What can Dele Alli do? Harry Kane! Oh, he squeezed it in! Dele Alli comes away with it. Now, can he set somebody up? Here's Heung-min Son, and Tottenham lead!
2-1, a defeat that officially eliminated the Germans. But there was still a match against Real Madrid, who, to seal the coffin, defeated Dortmund again. With 2 draws and 4 losses, Borussia Dortmund had their worst campaign ever. But it's also worth noting that years earlier, in 2003, Dortmund was eliminated in the qualifying rounds. But among the seasons they actually qualified for the group stage, the worst by far was 2017. But Dortmund also caused another Champions League winner to have their worst campaign ever, the French Marseille. PSG became the second French team to win. The first one was Marseille, who won the first title in the Champions League era in 1993. But exactly 20 years later, in 2013, they had a campaign so bad that it was almost impossible to believe that they had once been winners. In 2013, they entered the Champions League as the French runners-up, but the group they landed in was absolutely insane. Arsene Wenger's Arsenal, Napoli and Klopp's Dortmund, who were the reigning European runners-up. Everyone knew it was gonna be a huge challenge, but no one expected Marseille to be that bad. In the first match, they faced Arsenal at home and suffered the first blow, 2-1, a defeat that seemed like nothing compared to the next match, against Dortmund in Germany, where Marseille conceded not 1, not 2, but 3-0. So the next match was our best chance to win, against Napoli in France. But then,
Вот момент, вот удар и гол. Сапата, удар поворотом.
another defeat. Now their morale was rock bottom, and with no real hope of avoiding elimination, they just kept conceding goals. 3-2 to Napoli in Italy, 2-0 to Arsenal in England, and 2-1 to Dortmund in France. In 6 matches, Marseille lost literally every single one, finishing with a goal difference of -9. That's what you call a bad campaign. Let's see if any other champion managed to have an even worse campaign than that. Now, if Marseille was humiliated 20 years after winning the title, the next club had their worst campaign right when they were the defending champions, Chelsea. In this video, we're looking at the worst campaign of each club that won the title in the modern Champions League era, meaning from 1993 onwards. And Chelsea won the title in 2012, so they entered the 2012-13 season dreaming of a second title, signing players like Oscar and even Hazard. So their first group stage match was gonna be against Juventus in London. So Chelsea started well, going 2-0 up, but the failure began there, cause Juve drew it. At least in the next match, they bounced back, thrashing Denmark's Nordsjælland 4-0. It seemed like they'd easily be going to the round of 16. And the next match was another one they were expected to win easily, against Shakhtar Donetsk. But that's not exactly what happened.
И вот момент и гол! Вот, пожалуйста! Пас нужно на Фернандиньо с мячом, удар поворотом 2-0!
Shakhtar scored twice, ending the match 2-1. Now they had 1 win, 1 draw and 1 defeat. At least in the next match against Shakhtar again, they managed to revenge with a win. So Chelsea's entire qualification would come down to the next match, against Juventus in Italy. A loss would be the end. It was an early final for them. But then,
attenzione Pirlo, zona tiro, prova Pirlo, deviazione, rete! Entra Samuel in area di rigore, attenzione Vidal, rete! Nel recupero, sono 3 minuti di recupero, palla in verticale, attenzione, Giovinco, rete!
the Italians smashed 3-0. So there was no way out. The manager who had won the previous Champions League was sacked. It was such a bad result that even after another thrashing over Nordsjælland, they couldn't save themselves. Despite earning 10 points, they finished behind Juventus and Shakhtar. For the only time ever, Chelsea was eliminated in the group stage. And Juventus was the main reason for that elimination. But by coincidence, exactly 10 years later, in 2022, it was the Italians who suffered. In the 2022-23 season, Serie A's biggest winner had a campaign so bad that the fans just wanna forget about it. Sure, Juventus had already been struggling to go far in the Champions League, but 2022 was rock bottom. Led by Allegri, they landed in a group with PSG, Benfica and Maccabi Haifa, so it was gonna be tough. But for the fans, it wasn't anything Juventus couldn't handle. So they went into the first match against PSG, but Mbappe was on fire, scoring twice to end it 2-1. Well, they could still recover. The next match was at home against Benfica, so in front of their own fans, they took the lead. But then it came the cold shower.
Los para irnos al descanso. Se para ahí, lanzamiento de John Mario, gol. Enciala ahí. Ese balón, gol.
With 2 goals from Benfica, Juventus lost again. Until finally, in the next match against Haifa, they secured their first 3 points. Now it was time to get back on track. There was still time to recover. So in the following match against Haifa, they were obligated to win. But then,
Rocky again here early on, and Cornu has so much time again, and this time Chesney cannot keep it out. Gives it eventually to Atsili for 2!
in a match they absolutely needed a win, Juventus was defeated 2-0. An absolute disaster. Now the pressure was gigantic. Everything depended on victories against Benfica and PSG. So they went to Portugal, where they scored 3 goals. But someone forgot to tell the defense, cause they conceded 4. With another defeat, this time by 4-3, Juventus was officially eliminated. But there was still one last match to try to finish with some dignity. But at home, they were defeated by PSG. In 6 matches, Juventus won just 1 and lost 5. It was truly a disastrous campaign. Now before we move on to the 3-time European winners, there's another club that has 2 titles, one of those for the modern Champions League era. Porto. They were champions in 2004 with Mourinho, but 4 years before that, they were knocked out in the qualifying rounds, and 3 more years before that, they had their worst group stage campaign. By the 1997-98 season, Porto had won the Portuguese championship 3 times in a row, but that dominance in Portugal meant nothing in the European stage. Their group included Real Madrid, Olympiacos and Rosenborg from Norway, so everyone expected Portugal to finish second. But then the campaign began. 1-0 to Olympiacos, 2-0 to Real Madrid at home, and against Rosenborg, another defeat. 3 matches, 3 losses, and not a single goal scored. They needed to wake up. So after that, they drew with Rosenborg and beat Olympiacos. Finally a victory. But in the last match against Real Madrid, it came the last humiliation. 4-0. In 6 matches, Porto lost 4, finishing last in the group with a goal difference of -8. Truly a campaign to forget. Now while Porto had their worst campaign in the 90s, the next club had a humiliation much more recently. Man United. United under Ferguson reached 4 Champions League finals, winning 2 of them. But after his departure, the club's decline began, until in the 2023-24 season, they had their worst campaign ever. For that season led by Ten Hag, United made big signings, like Mason Mount, Højlund and Onana, bought for 50 million euros. But the disastrous campaign started with their new goalkeeper.
Kane. Sane with a chance to shoot. Oh, it's got under the goalkeeper.
Against Bayern in the first round, Onana started with a howler. Then Bayern kept pushing forward, and even though United scored 3 times, they conceded 4. A bitter defeat, but nothing compared to what happened next. At Old Trafford, they faced Galatasaray. Just imagine, it was a must-win for United, so they started well, scoring the opener, until Galatasaray equalized. But with Brazilians, United took the lead again. Everything was going fine, but with 20 minutes left...
Yilmaz, good ball, Actacoglu, equaliser! Davinson Sanchez with the header, and Icardi's in behind them, and Icardi's 1v1, lifts it over the goalkeeper and scores!
Galatasaray turned it around to 3-2, giving United a defeat at home. A true disaster. 2 consecutive losses. Until in the next match against Copenhagen, thanks to a header from Maguire, they finally secured their first win. It seemed like a recovery was coming. So much so that in the next match against Copenhagen again, they went 2-0 up in the first half. But from there, the disaster started again. They let Copenhagen equalize. Then United managed to score a third. But when it looked like they'd finish with another win, Copenhagen turned it around, 4-3. So if they wanted to stay alive, they had to win the next 2 matches. So in the match against Galatasaray, it looked like they might pull it off, leading 3-1 at one point. Until...
Ziyech whips it in, trying to catch... Oh, he's done him! He's done him! Really nice take by Actacoglu, oh my word!
With other mistakes from Onana, Galatasaray equalized 3-3, which officially eliminated Man United. Now their only hope was to at least secure a spot in the Europa League. But in the last match against Bayern, another defeat. In 6 matches, United won just 1, drew 1 and lost 4. But the most shocking stat is the number of goals. They scored 12 but conceded 15, having the worst defense in their entire group stage, tied only with Celtic and Red Star. What a mess. Now another club with a huge history in the Champions League is one that reached 2 finals in the last 3 years. Inter Milan. Back in 2000, they were knocked out in the qualifying rounds to a Swedish team. For many fans, that was rock bottom. But in the group stage, their worst campaign was actually much more recent. In 2020, amidst all those stoppages, Inter finished second in Serie A, just 1 point off the title. On top of that, they were Europa League runners-up. So just imagine the expectations they had for the 2020-21 Champions League, landing in a group with Real Madrid, Borussia Mönchengladbach and Shakhtar. But right in the first match, it came the cold shower. a draw with Borussia Mönchengladbach. Next up was Shakhtar, where even with all the pressure, they couldn't break through the defense, ending with another draw. It wasn't the start they expected, especially since they were now set to face Real Madrid at the Bernabeu. Inter had a team full of big names like Lukaku, Hakimi, Lautaro and others, so against Madrid they even scored 2 goals, but it wasn't enough. The Spanish won 3-2. 3 matches, no wins for Inter, so the moment to redeem themselves was in front of their own fans at home, where they could get revenge against Madrid, but that's not exactly how it went.
Es Azar el que va a disparar, 3 pasos de carrera, golpeo. La va a poner Lucas, balón al segundo palo, puede ser. ¡Gol!
Another defeat. Now Inter would only have a chance by winning the 2 following games against Mönchengladbach and Shakhtar Donetsk. So against the Germans, they went all in, finally coming away with their first victory. Now the qualification would be decided in the final game, at home against Shakhtar. It was win and qualify, just a draw and they were out. So Inter went for it. 56% of ball possession and 20 shots. But Shakhtar's keeper saved everything, ending the match 0-0. With just 1 win, 3 draws and 2 losses, Inter finished last in the group. Not even a spot in the Europa League. That was horrible. Now another club that had a humiliating elimination was the 4-time champion Ajax. Back in 2012, Ajax were Dutch champions. So for the 2012-13 season, expectations were high, but they had real bad luck. Ajax landed in the toughest group with Real Madrid, Dortmund and Man City. Yeah, in the same group that City had their worst campaign, Ajax also suffered, but it was even more humiliating. In their debut against Dortmund, they played well to hold off the attack, but near the end, Lewandowski scored the only goal of the match. First defeat. Next up was Real Madrid, but it was in the Netherlands, meaning they would play in front of their own fans. Except it didn't go so well. With 3 goals from Ronaldo, Ajax lost 4-1. It was turning into a disaster, but the next 2 matches was against Man City, where Ajax finally showed their strength, winning one and drawing the other, a solid response. Now if they beat Dortmund and Real Madrid, they'd be guaranteed a spot in the knockout stage. So against Dortmund in Amsterdam, they went to the match with confidence, but Dortmund's attack had other plans. Then Ajax scored a consolation goal, losing 4-1 again. But even worse is that, with another defeat, Ajax was now officially eliminated. However, there was still one last match, against Real Madrid at the Bernabeu. But it seems Ajax still hadn't learned from the previous matches. They took another 4-1 loss. In 6 matches, Ajax lost 4, scoring 8 goals but conceding 16, having literally the second worst defense in that entire group stage. But just like Inter, Ajax also had an even earlier elimination, when they were knocked out in the qualifying rounds in 2007. Now after Ajax, let's talk about a club that didn't win 4, but 5 Champions League titles, Barcelona. But despite those 5 trophies, Barcelona also crashed out in the group stage 5 times, one of those in 2021 and 2022. But if you think they were bad in those years, that was nothing compared to the humiliation they suffered in 1997. Led by Van Gaal, Barcelona had a strong squad, Luis Enrique, Figo and Rivaldo. But there was a big problem. It was the first season without Ronaldo, the R9, who had been sold, leaving a gap in the attack. Even so, expectations were high. In fact, Barca was the best in their group, which included Newcastle, PSV and Dynamo Kiev. But when they went to their first match against Newcastle, reality hit hard. The English side scored 3. Then Barca managed to score twice, but still lost. Then in the next match against PSV, they only managed a draw. It was clear that Barca's defense was far from good, but it was against Dynamo Kiev that the real humiliation came. In Ukraine, an incredible 3-0 for Dynamo. But if that was bad, at the Camp Nou, something unbelievable happened. With Shevchenko on fire, Dynamo scored 1, 2, 3 and 4, ending 4-0. A historic humiliation in Catalonia, completely eliminating Barcelona. The last 2 matches were just to go through the motions, and only then did they get their first win. But the joy didn't last long. In the final match against PSV, they drew again. In 6 matches, Barcelona won just 1, drew 2 and lost 3, scoring 7 goals but conceding 14, becoming the team with the worst defense in that entire group stage alongside Olympiacos. Well, now those recent years for Barca doesn't seem so bad. And one of the teams that humiliated Barcelona in recent Champions League history was Liverpool, with a massive 4-0 win. But the Reds also didn't escape an embarrassing elimination. Back in 2014 World Cup year, Liverpool finished as Premier League runners-up, getting a Champions League spot for the first time in 5 years. They had players like Gerrard, Coutinho, Henderson, Balotelli and more. It was truly a solid team. In a group with Real Madrid, Basel and Ludogorets, the expectation was to at least finish second. So they went at our first match, one they had to win, against Ludogorets at Anfield. But what seemed like an easy match, it turned into a battle. They scored the opener in the 82nd minute, but Ludogorets equalized and Liverpool only scored the winner in stoppage time. Liverpool were already showing weakness. Now the next opponent was Basel, where winning was crucial. But then...
Xhaka with the corner. And it's put in by Strela on the follow-up.
With just one goal, the Reds suffered their first defeat. And if things weren't already bad, the next opponent was the giant Real Madrid. So if they played poorly against Basel, this time it was even worse. They were dominated at home, losing 3-0. A real disaster. Then the next match was against Madrid again, this time in Spain. They needed to turn things around, but that's not what happened.
Marcelo's cross, Benzema!
Real Madrid won again, this time by 1-0. Another defeat for Liverpool, who now needed to win the next 2 matches to have any chances. So in the following game against Ludogorets, they went on the attack and scored 2 goals, but they ended up conceding 2 as well. So it all came down to the final round against Basel. But again, it didn't go as expected. They tied 1-1. In 6 matches, Liverpool won just 1, drew 2 and lost 3. A massively disappointing campaign, getting eliminated in the group stage. Now a team that we'd never imagined crashing out early in the Champions League is Bayern Munich. But even with their 6 titles, they've also had a surprisingly bad run. Man, one of the years Bayern won the European title was in 2001. So in the 2002-2003 season, the memory of them lifting the trophy was still fresh. Expectations were high, landing in a group with Deportivo La Coruña, Milan and Lens from France. But in the first match against La Coruña, it came the first shock. They suffered a 3-2 defeat at home. Something wasn't right, but it was still too early to panic. So they went to the next match against Lens, where Bayern started strong, taking the lead. But in the second half, the French equalized, ending at 1-1. This campaign was proving to be tougher than expected. But now came the biggest challenge, facing AC Milan. The match was in Germany, so the pressure was on Bayern to win. So they scored the opener, but Inzaghi ruined the party, turning it around 2-1. Another defeat for the Germans. Now Bayern's only hope was to win the next 3 matches. So they went to face Milan again, this time in Italy, where they fought hard, conceded a goal but managed to equalize. Until... By 2-1, Milan beat Bayern again. The Germans now had 3 losses in 4 matches. But unfortunately for them, it didn't end there. In the next round, they faced La Coruña, where things started nothing like expected, with the Spaniards scoring first. At least Bayern managed to equalize, so it seemed like it would stay that way, until the 89th minute.
Esperando el centro de Capdevila, un centro que llega muy pasado. ¡Gol!
Another defeat for Bayern. And when it seemed like it couldn't get worse, in the final match at home against Lens, they conceded 3 goals to end it 3-3. In 6 matches, Bayern drew 2 and lost 4, finishing last in the group. They performed so poorly that they became the 2nd worst team in their entire Champions League season. Unbelievable. Now, if Bayern has 6 titles, let's climb up the ladder to the 7-time champion Milan. But unlike Bayern, their worst campaign is still very fresh in the fans' minds. Back in 2021, Milan finished as Serie A's runners-up, securing a direct spot in the Champions League. For them, this was huge, their first appearance in the tournament since 2014. But in this return, they were unlucky, landing in a group with Liverpool, Atletico Madrid and Porto. Milan was a team in rebuild mode, with Rafael Leão, Kessié, Theo Hernandez, etc. But in the first match, their Champions League reputation seemed to help. Against Liverpool at Anfield, they went into half-time winning by 2-1. But the joy didn't last long. In the second half, Klopp's team scored twice to turn it around. Milan suffered their first defeat. Now the next match was at home against Atletico Madrid, And this time, Milan wasn't going to let victory slip away. They scored in the first half and held the lead. But with only 7 minutes left on the clock,
Forwards by Lamar, Renan Lodi in round the back, danger! Oh, yes! Cleared as far as Lamar. Oh, they're asking for a hand there. It's a penalty! Suarez! Oh, he scores!
they suffered a turnaround, a huge blow that crushed their confidence. Now the next opponent was Porto, but Milan couldn't impose themselves and even conceded a goal, ending with their third consecutive defeat. It was already a disaster, and it got worse when in the next match they conceded another goal to Porto, but this time they drew, ending at 1-1. It seemed they'd leave their Champions League with nothing. Until the next match against Atletico, they managed to score in the 87th minute, finally securing their first victory. Now to reach the round of 16, they'd need to beat Liverpool in the last match and hope for a combination of results. Hope is the last to die, so they went into the match and started by scoring. But Liverpool turned around again. Another defeat for Milan, who left the Champions League with just 1 win, 1 draw and 4 losses, finishing bottom of the group. Humiliating. But if we combine Milan's and Bayern's titles, it still falls short of the next team, Real Madrid. With 15 trophies, it's almost impossible to imagine Real Madrid having such a bad campaign. But of all seasons, there's one that was truly their lowest moment. Back in 2005, Madrid had the Galacticos, landing in a group with Lyon, Rosenborg and Olympiacos. It was supposed to be easy. Then in the first match against Lyon, Madrid was missing key players like Zidane and Ronaldo, the R9. Even so, they still had Raúl, Beckham and others. But what happened shocked everyone.
Le franc joué par Juninho, une frappe, le but, c'est le but, il est derrière. Il y a devant lui un mur à 3, elle tente la frappe. Le voilà. Et Roland Courbis avait raison. Bien joué Wilton pour décaler Réveillé.
A resounding 3-0. A massive defeat that showed something was wrong with this team. For the next match, Zidane returned, so they managed to beat Olympiacos. And then they also won both matches against Rosenborg. Now the next game was against Lyon again. It was time for revenge, so this time Real Madrid scored the opener with Guti. But in the second half, the French scored, ending at 1-1. So there was still one more match, against Olympiacos, where Madrid took the lead with Sergio Ramos. Another win was on the way. But the second half brought a surprise. The Greeks literally turned the game around. By 2-1, Real Madrid was defeated again. For a club like Madrid, this was already a disastrous campaign. Even so, they managed to finish second in the group, qualifying for the round of 16. Yeah, in Madrid's worst campaign, they still reached the round of 16. They've never been eliminated in the group stage. And the next opponent was Henry's Arsenal. But now Madrid had another weapon, Ronaldo, who had recovered. Zidane, Ronaldo, Beckham, everyone was on the pitch. But the one who stole the show was Henry.
Here's Henry getting cleared. It's Thierry Henry! He scored! He scored for Arsenal in the Bernabeu!
By 1-0, Madrid was defeated at the Bernabeu, which was the final straw, triggering a full-blown crisis, even leading to the resignation of the president Florentino Perez. But there was still the second leg, where Arsenal held firm, not letting Madrid break through the defense. So with an aggregate score of 1-0, Real Madrid was eliminated, finishing with their worst Champions League season. Just 3 wins, 2 draws and 3 losses. They've also been knocked out in the round of 16 other years, but no season was as bad as this one. But what did you think of this video? If you enjoyed it, I think you're gonna like this one too. So thanks for watching and bye!